morning, folks. Doug Rice. Good morning, Doug Rice. All right, 6 a.m., which is the time I've slated this will go live, be 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever time it might be on the other side of the country. And today, we're going to dive into some deep information. Let me tell you. Now, a while back, I did volume 1. I read the entire volume 1, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. And this is volume 2, only highlights and key points, because if you were present for that reading, you know it was very laborious. It was tedious. It was well written, but information packed. This summarizes things. And so the highlights and key points, as we will review them, may bring to mind certain aspects of the people that are now fighting with all that they have been given by the United States to fight. And now the United States seems to be threatening to cut off these people who claim to be Hebrews. Now, these individuals call themselves Jews. I will not shy away from that vernacular. That's what they call themselves. And so there appears to be a volume 2, and I might say a volume 3, of the publication, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, that is available for reading. Now, it doesn't escape my notice that I am not a Muslim. Of course not. And as a Hebrew, as the original covenant people of Scripture, Negroes, I just feel it's imperative to educate ourselves on the facts involving these individuals that call themselves Jews but are not. Now, let's talk about the synagogue of Satan. I've not used that in any written form in this presentation, but if we were to describe specific individuals that held specific values, doing specific things in specific ways, and we were to itemize what they've done comparatively to what perhaps Satan might do on any given day, we might consider them to be, in fact, yes, a synagogue of Satan. And so let us delve into the facts. Facts that come from volume 2, the highlights and key points of the secret relationship between blacks and Jews, as presented and compiled by the Nation of Islam, who too say that we Negroes are true Hebrews, though they worship Allah. Not my problem, just something I'm pointing out. Let's try to figure this out. All right, so what do we got? We got what I think will end up being the telltale tape of exactly who it is that is meting out all of the damage, the murder, the mayhem, the carnage, the genocide, and what they build the foundation for that slaughter upon. It is that they call themselves Jews. And so we will examine the highlights and key points of this publication, available to you from me upon request, or through donation if you so choose, whatever you may decide. This may be something they wanted to hide. We know they don't want us to know this. I'm going to point out, folks, that they did in fact attempt to kill, murder, poison Minister Farrakhan in his presenting this outside of this country. And current circumstances notwithstanding, it seems that the peril of Negroes in this country grows by leaps and bounds on any given day. And now, perhaps we might single out with purpose those most responsible various aspects of the sufferings involving Negroes in this country. And now we have the opportunity to look these facts directly in the eye. Here we are. Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2. Highlights and key points. Book summary. The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, has 512 pages with hundreds of footnotes, a full index, and a bibliography. It examines the Black-Jewish relationship after the Emancipation Proclamation and Civil War. It looks at the comparative economic, political, and social conditions of blacks and Jews in the Jim Crow South. Now, let me stop there for just a minute because now that I've read that simple introduction to this key point highlight preparation, I remember now that Volume 1 intricately delved into the facts involving how Jews were so closely associated with the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and that in almost every variant and every possible way, they were the heads of the stone, the tip of the spear. They were the catalyst through which modern day chattel slavery in the United States took its hold, which built this country on the backs and the blood of Negroes sold and bartered by Jews throughout centuries. This, Volume 2, covers what happens after the Emancipation Proclamation and also during Jim Crow. And as opposed to Volume 1's reading, is a summary of the events, highlights and key points, it may be to our advantage to take time to review Volume 1, which you can find in my YouTube library. I consider the body of work that I have in YouTube something I can be proud of, and I am proud of it. And I hope that perhaps any of you find the time, take a look at that first video, Volume 1, also by the Nation of Islam, also narrated and by myself, and we talk about some stuff. All right, let's continue. Blacks never received the promised 40 acres or the mules. They instead struggled to survive in the aftermath of 3 centuries of enslavement. At the same time, Jewish immigrants came to the South in ever increasing numbers. They found a nation determined to re-enslave blacks and force them back onto the plantations where they would once again be the driving force of America's cotton economy. The Secret Relationship, Volume 2, reveals how the growing community of Jewish politicians, Jewish businessmen, the Jewish press, the Jewish clergy, and the Jewish-led organized labor movement all participated in that white supremacist strategy to choke off all economic prospects of the black ex-slave. And to point out in that respect the need to suppress any growth coming from the former enslaved only exposed the threat they felt deeply that Negroes might get ahead. Keep in mind, coming out of slavery, Negroes were the only skilled laborers. Poor white males, usually the overseers of masses of educated and skilled Negroes, now had nowhere to go. And so, here we find out how this developed in association with the Jews that were nearly solely responsible for the enslavement's rise and development in the United States, and now see how our freedom supposedly affected them and Jim Crow there afterwards. Let's continue. Jews were elected to office in the South in surprising numbers, and Jewish politicians helped create and enforce the odious Jim Crow laws that kept blacks from developing an economic and educational foundation after slavery. Jews even altered the practice of their religion to accommodate the racist Southern traditions, all in an environment almost totally free of anti Semitism. As merchants and businessmen, Jews were leaders in the financial exploitation of the oppressed black population. In fact, The Secret Relationship, Vol.2, answers the provocative question: if blacks did not receive the promised 40 acres and a mule, who did? Jewish merchants settled where the black populations were the heaviest and targeted black cotton sharecroppers, growing extremely wealthy in the process. Many notable Jewish families and institutions, including the Lehman Brothers, Neiman Marcus, and even the infamous Rothschild family of international bankers, can trace their wealth to the cotton fields of the American South. After slavery, blacks who dominated the skilled crafts and construction trades found work and began to make a living for their families. Blacks, in fact, held a virtual monopoly of almost all labor. 95% of all the industrial work of the southern states was in the black man's hand. The American labor replaced them with white immigrants. A Jew, Samuel Gompers, led this movement to ethnically cleanse blacks from the American workforce. Under Gompers' direction, black participation in the skilled labor market was almost totally obliterated. His leading role in the oppression of Asian Americans, as well as his attempts to have them excluded from the country, was especially vicious, and many rabbis, Jewish businessmen, and Jewish politicians acted on behalf of this racist campaign. Jews were even found collaborating with and even financing the racial terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan. Early leaders of the Klan sailed all the way to Europe to seek investment from a wealthy Jew. They were successful. Jews actually became members of the Klan, and some Jewish merchants supplied the guns, sheets, and hoods. When wanton lynchings, tortures, and massacres occurred in America, Jewish people often praised these outrages, and some in the Jewish press cheered them on. When some Jews wanted to confront the violent terrorists in their midst, the most prominent Jew in America, Louis Marshall, founder of the American Jewish Committee, demanded that they leave the Klan alone. Well, who knew? Integrated involvement in the development of the Ku Klux Klan and the hand-in-hand relationship they seemed to have with the Jews at that time, who even, upon exclaiming regarding the violence suffered, they were told to leave these Klansmen alone by the top Jew of the time. Let's continue. This is shocking material that is fully supported by data from the Jewish historical record. There are documents, articles, letters, invoices, and quotes by Jewish rabbis, politicians, historians, scholars, and other notables attesting to all these facts. Obtain your copy today and learn all about the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. And so that is the book summary. As we continue, there are going to be 10 pages more of reading. My name is Doug Rice. Hopefully back in the saddle, hopefully back doing what I love to do: read, narrate, do a little commentary. Tried it with the camera on. I'm trying it now with the camera off. You tell me what you like better. I'm doing this about the evening time, and I'm going to put it on tomorrow, 6 a.m. So this will be a live, pre-recorded reading. But we're going over some interesting information. The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, highlights and key points. If you like what you see here, if you like what I do and you like the reading that I'm doing, do me a favor if you would. Look below at the ticker and contribute to this effort. I will tell you, you folks saved me today. You gave exactly what I needed, the daily bread required to fix the vehicle that brought me 1,500 miles back to my wife, and for that I appreciate it. I've had a long day getting that car fixed, and I appreciate your effort, and I have to get back at it, providing you content that you can learn from. This content, Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, highlights and key points provided by the Nation of Islam. Though I am not a Muslim, I am a Hebrew, I am a Negro, I am a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. I can identify with those who also admit who we are, though understandably confused at what they choose. I pray you give serious consideration to this document, to this reading. Remember, you can get your own copy of this particular document. Simply donate to the Doug Rice Show, put a dollar sign in front of it. Just email the Doug Rice Show at gmail.com. Tell me the PDFs you want. I'll give you a list. I'll give you the donation price list, all of that. But for now, let's continue with the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. Now, we've covered the book summary. Quite a summary it is. Let's move forward and see what the rest has to offer. So we're going to itemize, and they go through with I'd say a tedious momentum that builds throughout the entire document. And I don't want to say there are connective dots. There's connective tissue, but I'm going to go ahead and have you have a read with me as I do. Let's continue. So it begins. Jews spied on the Nation of Islam. Well, I don't doubt that, but let's continue. In 1942, Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith infiltrated Muhammad's Temple of Islam using a Negro employed by us, who proved quite instrumental in an FBI raid on the Chicago mosque that resulted in 82 arrests. In 1959, the American Jewish Committee sent black spies from the Urban League to Mr. Muhammad's Newark, New Jersey appearance. Jews in the South. By 1860, approximately 33,000 Jews lived in the South, nearly a quarter of those in Louisiana. Now, what I'm going to do is pause just for a moment and try to connect what was written above Jews spied on the Nation of Islam. It may have been a conclusionary thought to what was a previous page. I do not know, but I try to make sure there is continuity throughout the show. I will continue. At least 23 towns in the South are named for Jews, including Manassas, Virginia, Kaplan, Louisiana, Felonsall, Goldman, and Levi, Arkansas, Marks, Mississippi, and even Jewtown, Georgia. Many streets are named after Jews, including Weinstock, Holzman, March, Bernstein, Levy, and Levine streets. Even the Fort Myers military base was named after the Jewish Confederate officer Abraham Myers. Jewish merchants and peddlers collaborated with slavery, selling to plantations everything from slaves, drugs, rope, enslaved clothing to food, tools, and dry goods. They financed plantation operations and even bought and sold whole plantations, slaves and all. There were rabbis who owned and sold slaves and denounced the abolitionists, calling them demagogues and demons of hatred and destruction and fanatics. There were rabbis who believed abolitionism was the major threat to Jewish existence. Now, let me pause there for a minute and ask, why would anyone consider that abolitionism was a major threat to Jewish existence. It almost begs to say that without us being slaves, they would cease to exist because then we would be something else and they would be exactly what they are, which is not us. Hmm. Jews actually admitted that they benefited from the racist scapegoating of blacks in American society. Jews redesigned Judaism to accommodate the racists in the Dixie South. The common Jewish term for the devil is der Schwarze, the black one, or der Schwarz, man, black man. A common Jewish term for the devil is black man, from the Germanic tongue of which they originate, these false, fake, wannabe Shem related individuals. How dare they? And how any of you can grin and cheese in any of these individuals' faces after this reading is beyond me. I'm just saying. Uh, Jews in this time were openly espousing Ku Klux Klan like beliefs. Southern Jews talked about the necessity of exterminating black people. Jews actually instigated and participated in massacres of blacks. The Jewish owner and the editor of the Atlantic Journal whipped whites into a frenzy of race hate that ultimately led to the Atlanta Massacre of 1906. Look it up. Which claimed the lives of as many as 40 blacks, left 150 wounded, and caused over 1,000 to flee the city. In reading that, I need you to understand that there can easily be a repeat of those occurrences throughout this country in the matter of moments. I need you to understand that all of the sentiment against Negroes in this country lies just below the surface of the white psyche, ready to express itself at any given moment of the slightest provocation. And rather than you or I be a victim of these insipid, weak, mindless, violent creatures, I would say you do well to educate yourself as to their history so that you understand where they derive from. But that's just me. In the post Civil War era, Jews sold sheets and guns to the Ku Klux Klan. They financed its beginning and served as KKK officials. Atlanta Jews held a fundraiser, and the mayor and the governor, both well-known Klansmen, attended the affair as guests of honor. The Jewish owner and editor of the Atlanta Journal was the son of a rabbi, and high in the councils of the Ku Klux Klan. Jews were major forces in the racist Freemasonry movement, whose members fueled the Ku Klux Klan. One Jewish scholar could not have been clearer. At the turn of the century, a Masonic lodge was of higher priority than a synagogue. Now let's move on. The racist teachings of the Talmud. Now, I've covered this before in a past live. I've talked about the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmudic obscenity that Jews created in their quest to become Negroes, worshiping the true God. They brought with them their nomadic hedonistic worship, intertwined it with the true worship of the Most High, and serve it as fodder for those ignorant enough to swallow it whole. Racist teachings of the Talmud. The Talmud, the rabbinical teachings of European Judaism, requires that a Jew who passes near an inhabited Gentile dwelling must ask God to destroy it. Whereas if the building is in ruins, he must thank the Lord of vengeance. Now, I may have missed that one, but I need you to understand the attitudes that these cretins, these creatures, these Neanderthal related beings have. Regarding anything that is not related to them, they look down upon with most a vile countenance. And if that's not reflective of what they do to those inhabitants who were in the Middle East long before they thought up the lie to bring them square in the middle of the problem they now face, well, I don't know what to say. But that's the case. Think of that. One rule requires that a pious Jew must utter a curse when passing near a Gentile cemetery or when seeing a large Gentile population. It became customary to spit, usually 3 times, upon seeing a church or a crucifix, and sometimes insulting biblical verses were also added. You still grinning? It was Jewish rabbis who made up the curse of Ham myth. They applied a curse of blackness specifically to the African. It was used in the South as the divine rationale for slavery and anti African violence. Prominent American rabbis taught that blacks were Ham cursed slaves, that slavery was God's will. So I want you to understand, as you smile, moving about this country in the faces of those you may consider your friends, you need to ask these pointed questions. And if once, then ask again, do you believe these things? And watch them look you dead in your eye and lie. This is what makes them who they are. This is what makes them Jews. Maybe you need to consider exactly what a Jew is in order to define it correctly within your mind so that you're not held in derision as they laugh scoffingly behind your back, thinking you've taken their bait. And I do so before it's too late. Let's move on to Jews supported and helped set up Jim Crow. Jews supported and helped set up Jim Crow. Prominent Jews fought to establish, maintain, and strengthen the slave codes and the Jim Crow laws. There were over 100 Jewish mayors and literally hundreds of Jewish public officials in the slavery and Jim Crow South. They held the offices of congressman, senator, and state legislator. As elected officials, they upheld and reinforced white supremacy and racial discrimination. Jews served as police chiefs and as sheriffs in the South and performed critical roles as lawmakers within the plantation culture. The Jewish mayor of Wilmington rallied the mob of 600 whites that massacred as many as 60 blacks. Jews supported these attacks, and several Jews signed a petition calling for the removal of pro black office holders. Jews routinely held seats on Southern school boards and created racially segregated colored school systems. The same kind of system that Brown versus Board tried to end. In one southern city, the curriculum for whites beyond the 3 R's included Latin, history, geology, astronomy, rhetoric, physiology, and algebra, while education for blacks focused solely on manual training. After emancipation, a southern Jewish newspaper declared, "The white man will rule by fair means or by foul. God Almighty never created the Negro, the white man's equal, and even an act of Congress will not change his supremacy." Now, I need you to understand, brothers and sisters, take just a small respite from reading, that you are surrounded by these creatures. This is the sentiment they held for Negroes before it was hidden so deftly and tucked away so neatly back in the recesses and the annals of history. But here it is, laying bare before you exposed for the world to see. And I dare Negroes to take a look and then look in their face and smile. How dare you? Jews were involved in the 1906 Atlanta massacre of as many as 40 innocent blacks, and probably many more. The Nazis forced Jews to carry Jewish passports, stamped with an identification letter J. A Jew in Atlanta publicly proposed a similar plan for all Southern blacks. Jews were major dealers of slave picked cotton, as well as owners of cotton mills. Many of them became millionaires at a time when the vast majority of black farm owners were trying to support families on a daily wage of about 50 cents. And these same contemptuous pieces of vile human waste would dare tell you, a Negro, to pick yourself up by your goddamn bootstraps. Well, the next time one of them tells you to do so, you make sure you remember this reading. Jews, wealthiest Americans. Let's move on. One Jew actually held title to the entire Grand Canyon. Shall I read that again? Yes. One Jew actually held title to the entire Grand Canyon. Let that marinate. According to scholars, the rise in the social and economic position of the Jews has been extremely rapid, far surpassing that which can be shown for any other immigrant group. No group experienced such startling success as the Jews. American Jews have long enjoyed a comparative income advantage, earning considerably more, on average, than other ethno-religious groups. Jews quickly rose to the heights of economic security by reaping the profits of slavery. They had no interest in assisting the black man out of his degraded condition and sought no alliance, friendship, or cooperation. Plantation supply and the marketing of slave produced goods like cotton, sugar, and tobacco were the sectors in which the largest Jewish fortunes were to be found. Jewish commerce in the South. Jewish peddlers invaded the Deep South and targeted the black ex slave and secured a great amount of Negroes' trade. One scholar wrote that Jewish merchants flocked to the South and preyed upon the naive Negro. When blacks started to leave the South for the cities, Jewish merchants started migrating to big cities as well. They sold overpriced and inferior goods intended for the Negro market. A substantial amount of slavery produced sugar was grown by the Louisiana Jew. The Jew controlled the world trade of bananas, the most popular fruit. The Jewish family controlled more than 6 million acres of ranch land in Texas in the years after the Civil War. One Jew owned, as I said, the entire Grand Canyon. The Jew was called the kingpin of the cotton trade. Jews dominated the retail, wholesale trade in the racist South. Stores closed on Jewish holidays, and the main streets of southern cities, as a result, were dead. Jews held a monopoly on many necessities, and their commerce fueled the plantation economy. Jews had a major part in setting up the crop lien system that kept black sharecroppers in crushing debt. In fact, the system was identical to that described in the Jewish Talmud. The strategy of racial economic targeting had been so effective at building wealth for Jews that it was readily employed in the major black population centers of the North and remained the dominant economic model of the American inner city. One Jewish family believed blacks needed money no more than turtles. Now, I need you to understand this is what's coming out of their foul fucking mouths. I'll reserve the right to curse. It's my show. Now, contempt is one thing, hatred is another, but incessant, burning vilification of an individual class, a group of individuals is something that just touches the surface of what Negroes should feel regarding these individuals that would dare grin and cheese in the ignorant faces of Negroes they've kept so ill-informed about themselves. This isn't a joke. This is real deal. These are facts. I'm not making shit up. Why don't you present this to any one of them and see what they say? I bet you'll end up giving them a great day. Jewish department store, let's move forward. Jewish family owned department stores dominated retail streets in almost every small town and city. Sockowitz in Houston, Gottschalk's in New Orleans, Rich's in Atlanta, Garfinkel's in Washington, D.C., Thalheimer's in Virginia, Guggenheimer's of Lynchburg, Goldsmith's in Memphis, Neiman Marcus, and even the largest jewelry chain, Zales, originated as tiny Jewish retailers in the Jim Crow South. All Jewish department stores practiced Jim Crow discrimination in hiring and sales. They had become so well known for their racist policies that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and civil rights activists often targeted them with their protests. Racial exclusion by the big Jewish retail funneled black trade to those Jewish merchants operating in the black sections of town. These merchants set artificially high prices for their products. Jews as money lenders. Jews were always the money lenders of Europe. They played the same role among blacks in America. They controlled the availability of credit in the Jim Crow economy. Jews set up an exclusive banking network throughout the South that gave them a monopoly on credit and investment. Over and over, they invested in the very profitable slave trade and in the Jim Crow infrastructure. The reality of Southern black life, the shack housing, the unpaved roads, the lack of clean water, plumbing, and electricity, the substandard and non existent schools and health services, all problems easily managed through bank financed infrastructure projects, was never addressed by this thriving Jewish banking network. Jewish merchants in their country stores acted as bankers and kept black sharecroppers producing cotton by manipulating their debt and by using the harsh Jim Crow laws to keep the cotton coming. The present day 400% interest payday loans, the extortionate credit cards, multi charging, extortionate, that's correct, extortionate credit card multi charges, the easy pay loans, the subprime mortgages with ballooning interest rates, and the home equity loan swindles, all designed to ensure the working poor have their origins in the aggressive targeting of the newly freed black man and woman in the Deep South, who were trapped by the predatory practices of Jewish merchants. The now defunct financial giant Lehman Brothers began as the owner of a string of plantations and slaves. Let me read that again for you, folks. The now defunct financial giant Lehman Brothers began as the owner of a string of plantations and slaves. You still grinning? Sharecropping, crop lien mortgage system, debt, and usury. Pay attention. We're going to get into the weeds here. Under sharecropping, black ex slaves became rent paying tenants on a white man's plantation, renting under the worst possible terms. But the critical foundation of this scheme was the enactment of crop lien laws, under which the merchant supplied critical necessities to the sharecropper on credit, but took collateral in the form of the sharecropper's future crop. This gave the local merchants, many of whom were Jewish, the central role in enforcing this new form of black slavery. Most black farmers under this system quickly found themselves hopelessly in debt. Merchants took liens on the farms and soon took the farms. The merchants, as lien holders, came into possession of many plantations, and the black man was returned to virtual slavery. The slang expression, the man, which black America once used to describe white authorities, was previously used to describe this lien holding merchant. Jewish merchants and peddlers kept little ledger books filled with hieroglyphic scribble only they could decipher. They called it keeping a book on the schwarzes, the Yiddish term for niggers. And in secret, debt and paying codes became the method by which the merchants loaded on the debt and monitored and controlled the day-to-day affairs of the black sharecropper. Some merchants reportedly charged blacks 10% per week. Charges, overcharges, late fees, handling charges, service charges, supervision fees, and a host of other unscrupulously imaginative fees are deducted for taxes, clothing, shoes, food, or any other item, whether it was actually purchased or not, and are based on the credit prices, which have marked up the items by as much as 400%. And that's before the usurious interest is applied. Throughout history, Jews were so much identified with the crime of usury that the subject has its own entry in the Jewish Encyclopedia. Under the sharecropping system, the hardest working and most productive farmers were actually penalized by the merchant. Their debt was increased to keep them locked on the land for generations. Blacks who challenged this system of exploitation found themselves or their family members imprisoned, beaten, or murdered by the KKK. The credit schemes of Southern merchants who was said to have drained 75 million from farmers in just 1 year of overcharges. In today's dollars, that equals 2.9 billion. W.E.B. Du Bois concluded that fully three-quarters of the wages due black farmers since the Civil War was simply stolen from them. Origins of sharecropping. The source of the sharecropping system that re-enslaved blacks after emancipation was likely the Jewish Talmud, which established elaborate rules for operating an agrarian economy that included sharecropping, credit arrangements, liens, and even the use of slaves. Ancient rabbis were large landowners who managed slaves and tenant farmers and sharecroppers, a strikingly similar arrangement to the establishment in the American South. Now, quick pause for the cause to let folks know my name is Doug Rice, host of the Doug Rice Show, back at it, educating, teaching, giving as much instruction, narration as I can. This document, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, Highlights and Key Points, is just one of the many documents I've gone over. We have Volume 1 in the annals of my YouTube library. Please go take a look for it. I point this out because today Jews are principally and primarily a focal point in the world stage. They are the most murderous group of individuals on the planet right now. They're working toward 50,000 human beings dead over the past just over a year because 1,500 people were killed and taken hostage. And they use a lot of their logic from the Talmud, their thought process, what they believe about lives that are not associated or not Jewish, quote unquote, lives, the Ashkenazi, European, Polish descendant of Japheth, having no association with Shem whatsoever. These vile, murderous creatures who today dominate the news, threatening the world with annihilation if they cannot exist, and murdering indiscriminate numbers of people of color. These pale palm colored, weak, under the sun, wrinkling degenerates, it stretches the etymologist's ability to express. But when you look in the face of these creatures and you see the history reflected by this reading, I cannot imagine any single Negro taking a single one of them seriously. I can't imagine them offering a hand in friendship. I can imagine anything that might be done that associates themselves with being civil beings. They're not. They hide behind themselves a history that needs to be exposed. And this, I do believe, scratches the surface while moving the needle. So please, if you do, and I really appreciate you, look down below at the scrolling title to give any support you might have to this effort. My name's Doug Rice, trying to get back on the fence, back on the saddle, back in the fight. And I decided to do this particular recording at night so that you can have it in the morning, 6 a.m. I hope you guys enjoy it. I more likely will be out and about. Maybe I'll do a remote from where I'm at. But right now, we are going to continue our reading of The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, Highlights and Key Points. But do me also this solid. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share this live. It's the Doug Rice Show, just so you know. Back to the reading. Here we go. All right, so cotton, Jewish gold. Again, we're reading The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2, Blacks and Jews, Volume 2. Just a summary, nearly halfway through. Cotton, Jewish gold. For 134 years, cotton was America's largest export and the single biggest engine of Western expansion. Cotton was at the very foundation of the American economy, and it drove the textile and clothing industries in New England and turbo-fueled economic and industrial growth worldwide. Cotton was to the world economy in its era what oil is to the present. It is the single biggest proof that Western civilization was built by the sweat, blood, and tears of Black African men, women, and children. Jewish Encyclopedia. The cotton plantations were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them. Shall I read that again from the Jewish Encyclopedia? The cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them. What more do you need when they admit it out of their own goddamned mouths? Alabama, cotton was arguably the most important single factor in the American Jews' phenomenal acquisition of wealth. And at the same time, the commodity most responsible for the oppression of economic decline of blacks in America. Cotton was known as Jewish gold. Alabama appointed Jewish merchant Meyer Lehman, founder of the giant and now defunct Lehman Brothers investment house, as cotton agent for the state. Wow. This put Lehman in charge of managing the state's chief asset, a million bale annual cotton crop, as well as the state's 435,000 enslaved Africans. Well, now, I wonder if Lehman Brothers includes this kind of information in their company history online. Huh, very interesting. I wonder if how many black employees at Lehman Brothers, now defunct and underwater, knew that they worked for such a vile and contemptuous group of beings. Much of the cotton picked by black slaves and sharecroppers fed Jewish clothing and textile manufacturers known as the needle trades. According to the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, the needle trades have been the most distinctive Jewish group of industries in the United States. Jews supplied clothing for slaves. They supplied the Confederate Army with uniforms. And they supplied the Ku Klux Klan with hoods and sheets for their terrorist raids and lynching parties. Now, I wonder if you could circulate that bit of information amongst our kin. For God's sake, we certainly need to bring it in. Cotton was so central to the wealth of New York, now the American Jerusalem, that it was said that its glory was built largely on the bricks of cotton. Did I skip that one? I did, didn't I? Much of the cotton picked by I did. Jews supplied clothing for those, and I did that. Okay, I wanted to make sure. I'm just taking my eyes off the screen and put it back on. Bam. Back by 1860, cotton manufacturing had become the leading industry in the USA. A single bale of cotton picked by a black man or woman for the daily wage of 43 cents went directly into the hands of Jewish clothing manufacturers. And by 1880, 6,000 clothing firms nationwide were manufacturing clothing worth $209 million. So you think about black people now wearing these clothiers, all of their Jewish clothes that they're wearing, Chanel, all I can't imagine all of it, the cotton that we picked. Now we're wearing it like we've arrived. I wish somebody would share this live. I really do. That's amazing. A Jewish cotton mill owner in Atlanta retired with a cool $10 million to his credit at a time when most Georgia farm workers, numbering 170,000, were trying to support families on a daily wage of about 50 cents. Do you see how we enslaved them? How they enslaved us and we enriched them? That's what I meant. The Rothschilds. The Rothschilds' interests in American slavery. Now, this is going to be interesting, folks. We're about to get a very interesting look into jewelry. Listen carefully. The Rothschild family was the richest in the world. By 1825, they were 10 times the size of their nearest rival. A larger portion of their income came from the sale of cotton cloth manufactured at the factories in England, cotton that came direct from the colonial plantations of the New World. Remember, the Rothschilds sent his 5 sons to the 5 corners of the world, 4 corners of the world, sent his 5 sons out to build this banking empire because they were getting rich from this industry built on the backs of slaves. Stop grinning and cheesing in public. A Jew might see you, especially if you're wearing their clothing. We'll get through it. The Rothschilds' unparalleled success was based on their extensive trading in African slave produced commodities. The Rothschilds financed railroads in Africa, America's war to seize Mexico, both the Panama and Suez Canals, the mines of South Africa, and the development of the notorious apartheid system, and the tobacco trade in the slavery entrenched island of Cuba. So, do you understand that Jews are the absolute enemies of Negroes and always have been? Do not ever allow yourself to believe that a Jew is your friend if you are a Negro, because they are not. And they never, ever were. Jews could have helped us, but didn't. The next heading. Without the capital needed for investment in its infrastructure, slavery and Jim Crow would certainly have died a quick and worthy death. Instead, Jewish merchants brought capital investment to their fellow racists. These merchants supplied a lifeline, the economic oxygen, to keep alive a system so injurious to blacks that the effects are still prominently felt to this day, a century and a half after so called emancipation. Blacks supplied 100% of the hard labor, while Jewish attainment of wealth in this critical post Civil War era was unmatched in Jewish history. Other commodities like corn, wheat, and rice were grown to feed the cotton slaves and support the cotton economy. And despite their lucrative post Civil War experience in America, Jews never used their immense financial power to redress the racial injustices at any time during their presence in Dixie. No boycotts, no protests, no restricting of creditors, simply withdrawing from the slave economies in which they carried on their most profitable trade. Jewish historians universally refer to the Jim Crow era as their golden age. Do you want me to say that again for you? Do you want me to read it again? Somebody send this, if you don't mind, to the ADL. Somebody send this to Mr. Greenblatt. He knows who I am. Somebody send this to Benjamin Netanyahu, Mr. Milkowski, the Polish Jewish son of a goddamned immigrant to Israel and not a Jew. These are the people that grin and cheese in black faces. These are the people that demand when someone like Kyrie and Kobe talk about us being the chosen Negroes, the jewels of God, and not the Ashkenazi impostor that is claimed to be the true chosen Jew. These are the folks that step up and start talking and whispering in the ears of these individuals, giving them different things to recite. But why don't Kanye and Kyrie read this so they know not to trust these cretins? It bothers me. Jewish historians universally refer to the Jim Crow era as their goddamned fucking golden age. Fuck their ass. A white founder of the NAACP was moved to declare it is a fact that some of the most rabid anti-Negro Southerners that I have met during my life have been Jews. Did you hear that? A white founder of the NAACP was moved to declare it is a fact that some of the most rabid anti-Negro Southerners that I've met during my life have been Jews. What the fuck are we talking about? What is going on here? How can any of us look any of them in the face and think they're your goddamn friends with a history like this? Don't they know? Of course they know. They don't want you to know. Serious business. Jews ethnic cleansed the US labor force of blacks. Even before the Civil War, black slaves were so dominant in the workforce that some of the most racist whites, unable to compete, became abolitionists just to break up the black monopoly. Dear God. Moreover, many of these black slaves were the major breadwinners for the white families that enslaved them. Affirmative action. Some states seeking to give the white man an advantage passed laws prohibiting the hiring of blacks, slave or free, when a white man could be found to do the work. These were the first affirmative action laws in American history, entirely for the benefit of the white man. So the next time somebody talks to you about affirmative action, remember that affirmative action first benefited your cracker asses. Just remember that. The white worker was unable to compete on equal footing with a solid black resume of 310 years. After slavery, blacks dominated the skilled crafts and construction trades. 95% of all the industrial work of the southern states was in the black man's hands. Blacks, in fact, held a virtual monopoly of almost all labor. Jews assumed the leadership of the American labor movement and helped to engineer the racial policies specifically designed to choke off the economic prospects of the black laborer. Under Jewish founder and president Samuel Gompers, and I've seen that name, the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, successfully bludgeoned industrialists into a whites only hiring policy that would have come to characterize the labor market for the next century. AFL unions became the instrument of white working class racism and began systematically forcing black workers out of a variety of occupations they once dominated. The AFL even proposed its own final solution: black colonization in Cuba or Liberia. Gompers' union movement recruited many Ku Klux Klan members who influenced union activities through the 20th century. Samuel Gompers' union used violence to remove blacks from the American workforce. W.E.B. Du Bois charged Gompers, the most prominent and powerful Jew in America, with engineering a massacre of scores of innocent blacks in East St. Louis in 1970. More than 200 blacks killed, $7 million in property destroyed, 10,000 blacks forced to flee their homes. Labor unions were the instrument that forced black workers out of the jobs they had held for many years by replacing them with newly arrived white immigrants. This represented a far greater assault on black progress than any midnight ride of the Ku Klux Klan. Black women were forced into the labor market as maids and caretakers into white homes because their black husbands were limited to work in the lowest paying occupations. Between 1890 and 1920, the number of white female domestic servants declined by one third, while black women domestics increased by 43%. A direct reflection of the loss of opportunity for blacks and the consequent enrichment of whites. Jewish scholars who have studied the startling success of Jewish immigrants attribute their rapid rise directly to the advantages they received through their union membership. The very people who had built the nation, having laid the roads, cleared the farmland, constructed the homes, the bridges, the waterways, the dams, having grown and harvested the cotton, wheat, rice, corn, and sugar, were by the 20th century almost entirely or underemployed. And all of that fulfilled prophecy, fulfilled what scripture said, that we would build and others would occupy. We would plant and others would eat. All of it working out. And to think that the very creatures, the vile Cretans who pretend to be Hebrews, are the very ones who would be instrumental in fulfilling that prophecy by denying us the ability to prosper in the country of our enslavement during our punishment for our unfaithfulness and rebelliousness to God. So unwittingly, these Jews play into the hands of God Almighty, meting out the punishment, denying us the ability to be productive in this country, and they don't even know it. But what's coming for them is what I'm most interested in. because they have so much to pay for, don't they? Don't they? There is a reckoning coming for these motherfuckers. Yeah, I'm back. Just had to say it. Oh well. Okay. Jewish scholars who have studied the startling success of Jewish immigrants attribute their rapid rise directly to the advantages they received through their union memberships. The very people who have built the nations, I wrote that already. Okay. Jews were among the leaders of America's anti-Asian campaigns. The labor movement served as the hub of these anti-Asian activities, which included a series of racist legislative initiatives, a vile public relations onslaught, and pervasive Klan-like mob violence. In the same year, the Russians enacted severe laws restricting the movements and conduct of Jews. Gompers successfully lobbied the United States Congress to pass the Asian Exclusion Acts, which banned Asians, the main economic competition with Jews, from the country for 20 years. These federal laws were the first to discriminate against any immigrant group, setting a disturbing legal precedent in the land of the free. Long before Hitler, American Jews were intimately involved in the hateful Yellow Peril frenzy, including many prominent Jewish figures, a Supreme Court justice, labor leaders, congressmen, bankers, rabbis, politicians, newspaper owners, and journalists, as well as the Jewish press. Now let's move on to KKK and Freemasonry. Jews supplied the KKK terrorists with sheets, hoods, and guns. Said one merchant, I used to sell them the sheets, and Sam the tailor made them into robes. Let me tell you, we had a good business going. The most prominent Jew in the South financed the Klan by selling bales of slave-picked cotton. Many renowned American Jews were Ku Klux Klan members, sympathizers, and supporters. Jews were a major force in Freemasonry and were probably the first to introduce the movement into the country. One Jewish scholar could not have had been clearer. At the turn of the century, a Masonic lodge was of higher priority than a synagogue. At least one Masonic lodge had a slave auction room. A Jewish store owner reportedly paid Klan initiation fees for his employees. A Jewish businessman was presented with 50 roses by hooded Klansmen at a public ceremony held in broad daylight at a city park. They were honoring the Jewish merchant on his golden business anniversary. Yeah. Jewish lawyers handled legal issues for the Ku Klux Klan. At the same time, there were record lynchings of black people. The Klan in Atlanta had an office next door to the headquarters of the Federation of Jewish Charity. The future Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black was invited by a Jew to join the Klan. One Southern rabbi claimed, some of my best friends are Klan members. Jews attended Klan rallies and Klan parades. The most prominent Jew in America, founder of American Jewish Committee, Lewis Marshall, was a legal advisor to the American Eugenics Movement, a pre-Hitler association of whites committed to the racial cleansing of America. Marshall opposed the anti-lynching bill proposed by the NAACP. A rabbi defended by the Ku Klux Klan who he said were determined that the Negro should not wield the scepter of government over the white man. It served its purpose admirably. It functioned with a certain amount of law and decency. Interesting. Jews and lynching. In the period from 1882 to 1927, at least 4,951 persons were lynched in the United States. The overwhelming majority of lynchings occurred in the southern states. Of these, 3,513 were blacks, including 76 black women. And many victims were so mutilated that their remains were not even identifiable. These atrocities frequently occurred in places where Jews served as community leaders and elected officials. Prominent Jews were most often heard publicly supporting the lynching of blacks. The Jewish press defended lynching. The white man is not only superior to the black man, but will assert his supremacy at the proper time and in the proper manner. The Talmudic roots of lynching. The fact that such horrific violence is described in exacting detail in the Jewish holy book Talmud. The ancient rabbis actually prescribed the way to carry out their form of Jewish justice, a method that was eerily similar to the tragedies that befell many black Americans. Jews participated in mob violence against blacks. A Russian Jew led a mob in the commission of at least 7 murders and the destruction of 40 homes and 24 businesses in Springfield, Illinois in 1908. The NAACP formed in response to this act. The Jewish-owned New York Times, bought in 1896 by Adolph Ochs, pronounced Ox, was a white supremacist newspaper. They published racist articles and editorials indistinguishable from the attitudes and beliefs of the Ku Klux Klan. The paper used terms like nigger, coon, and darky to describe blacks. The Ku Klux Klan capitalized Negro in its publications years before the New York Times would. This well-known Jewish retailer, Saxon Company, was advertising new fall skirts for women in the Ox paper. It's assured potential customers that if they didn't want blue stripes, black, or navy, they also had them in nigger brown. Jews had publicly and contemptuously asserted that the Negro forms the mud at the base of civilization. And I want you to read what's being said here. Understand who is your friend and who the fuck is not your goddamned friend. Send this to as many people as you might care to, especially those that want to grin and cheese and massa please in the faces of these who call themselves Jews. Jews selling blacks slave sale advertising by American Jews highlights and points. Interesting. Now, obviously, they've gone into something new here, but I'm going to finish it. This secondary book, which is just a page or so, this book presents disturbing evidence of American Jewish participating in the black African slave trade. Jewish merchants from all over the world participated in the inhumane trade in black human beings after dominating some of the most important slave trading markets. Jews were particularly active in Brazil and the Caribbean, and much of their activity occurred outside the eventual boundaries of the United States, long before it was established as a nation in 1776. Some Jewish scholars have used United States Census records, which show modest Jewish slaveholding, to diminish the role of Jews as major owners of black human beings. This, however, is highly misleading. Jews were twice as likely as the general population of American whites to own Africans. Moreover, many Jewish merchants were simultaneously retailing dozens, even hundreds of Africans through their business enterprises. The 1830 census shows that all the Jews of Charleston, South Carolina claimed to own a total of 104 black human beings, but a single Jew, Jacob Cohen, on a single day in 1857 offered for sale 125 nice Negroes. That same year, the same Mr. Cohen teamed with a Gentile and advertised almost twice the number, 210, in a single day. Jewish slave traders, by economic necessity, tried to turn over their black human merchandise as quickly as possible. And this brief ownership of Africans by many Jewish merchants is not reflected in the census records. Nevertheless, in marking the products of slave labor and merchants in not reflect. Nevertheless, in marking the products of slave labor and supplying sand plantations with items of commerce, even buying and selling whole plantations along with the slaves, Jewish merchants helped make slavery profitable in America. The language used in these slave advertisements by Jewish merchants, many of them serving as high synagogue officials and pillars of the Jewish community, betrays their comfort with the horrors of black slavery. Cargoes of likely Negroes were brought and sold alongside farm animals and furniture. Whole plantations are sold with all Negroes included in the purchase. Shipping services are offered with roomy accommodation for slaves. Insurance is offered for slave ships. Negro and mulatto wenches are put on the auction block at temptresses. All these bargains publicly offered by Jews in America's city newspapers. Whole gangs of Negroes, some advertised in families, are publicly traded as objects of commerce for pure profit. The image of an ad by Jacob Cohen and Son on the book's front cover is a perverse example of a Jewish family selling a black family. It shows them giving financing terms for the sale, a business practice that proves the complicity of the Jewish financial network. One merchant has Sunday Negro slaves in families. Another sells a plantation with a gang of about 60 Negroes and with Negro houses to accommodate 50 slaves. And another Jewish merchant guarantees the lowest prices on real estate, Negroes, horses, etc. One merchant sells 40 valuable Negroes, consisting of house servants and field slaves. Another sells a prime gang of 43. Another merchant sells Negroes, 80 at one time. And yet another has 65 Negroes at private sale. Children 5 years old, 9 years old, 11, 16, 17, 2 months, even infants are all sold without any concern for their welfare or their families. One advertises a valuable family of field slaves, including an infant and a 2-year-old, both of whom the Jewish seller already determined to be field slaves. One seeks to hire 150 young, healthy, able bodied working Negroes. Evidently, he felt it necessary to explain that the Negroes would be treated with humanity. He offered a special deal to sellers. He would not charge for the temporary lodging of sucking children of Negroes sent to him to sell. Africans are advertised as good housekeepers for elderly whites, and it is chilling to consider the fate of the many black girls and boys advertised for sale. One Jewish auctioneer sells rice field Negroes. Another sold 10 long cotton Negroes. One offered 100 prime Virginia slaves, but later had to take out an ad to rebut rumors that it was instead fraudulently selling Kentucky slaves. Freedom seeking blacks are branded runaways and doggedly pursued to the newspaper notices. One Jew chases a black woman for years, advertising for the return of my Negro girl when she was 25 and again when she was 31. Other Jews captured and held runaways for the bounty. Jews are found serving the plantation masters selling Negro jackets, Negro shoes, Negro clothing. One selling 7 bales of American cloth for plantation Negroes. One merchant offers newly clothed Negroes, for which he added $3 to the sale price. Another entices slave owners with splendid accommodations for Negro sales. One Jew seeks in advertisement to hire an overseer for his plantation. The Jewish slave dealers distinguish whether they're black human chattel or colored or mulatto, foreign born Africans or native born Negroes. And much of this black merchandise is warranted, sober and honest, of good character, and documented as having made no attempts to run away. One group of blacks for sale is advertised to have just one previous owner. Jewish brokers receive commissions on their slave sales, one offering special terms for Negroes, bond with interest and security payable in 1 year, black slaves on layaway. Synagogue officials and even rabbis sold black people. Rabbi Joseph Jacob Levin sold 22 likely Negroes for investment purposes, he states in his ad. Long before the Nazis forced Jews to wear yellow stars, Jewish police were threatening Charleston blacks with corporal punishment if they did not present their slave badges to any white man who asked. A Jew seeking his runaway Negro informs the public that she had badge 2090, which proved that she was his property. Other Jewish constables incarcerated blacks they suspected of being runaways and advertised their description in the public newspaper. Another Jew in the role of city assessor reminded his fellow Charleston citizen through a newspaper notice that taxes were due on their slave property. Anyone who might assist his runaway, one Jew threatens, shall be prosecuted with the utmost rigor of the law. In one particular callous display, prominent Jewish merchant Abraham Sexus composed poetry for his ads, which reads in part, "He has for sale some Negroes, male will suit full well for grooms. He has likewise some of their wives can make clean dirty rooms. For planting too, he has a few to sell for the cash of a various price, to work for the rice or bring them to the lash. The young ones true, if that will do, may same he had of him. To learn your trade they made him made, or bring them to your trim. If you buy them of me, he assures, their ere you say they will obey." These advertisements represent proof of substantial Jewish involvement in the greatest criminal endeavor in the history of the entire world, the Black Holocaust. And there you have it, folks, the full reading and a bonus reading at the end, which I did not see coming, but I do appreciate your being here. We have read The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. Highlights and key points. Please forgive my excitement in certain areas. I'm certain you can understand the passion to which I've read, and prayerfully you may support this effort and also share, like, subscribe. This has been the Doug Rice Show. I appreciate your vibe. I gotta go. Just so you know, you folks are the backbone of what I do, and I will be doing this more and more just for you. All right, folks, I gotta go. You have yourself a wonderful day. My name is Doug Rice, and now it's time I go away. Have a good day.